Previously on agentpalmer.com, Mrs. Agent Palmer has a new series debuting on the blog. Being Jewish colors the black and white history in Mouse, and as far as the next mission is concerned, I'm only one season into Enterprise. This is the Palmer Files, episode 169, featuring John Dodds, who doesn't have the time to slow down. You'll hear how he started in the mailroom over the course of a long career with not one but two 20-year stints, plus constant change, unearthing uniqueness, texture, jazz, and much, much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show!
I started in the mail room, and that's when we had paper mail. I don't define retirement. I regard it as next stage. But you don't have to do an awful lot of stuff, and that's the problem. If everyone is busy life hacking and shortcutting their ways through, what are you racing for? You go and sit down and listen to jazz, and it'll go off on a tangent, and so do you. And that's the essence, and you're allowed to do that.
Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 169th episode is John Dodds. He's got his own non-traditional consultancy, the Sharp End LLC. He's the host of Cafe W.O.W podcast, W.O.W standing for Words of Wisdom, and he volunteers for my local radio station as a host and board member, which is how I met him. John is worldly, knowledgeable, shows no sign of slowing down, as you'll soon hear, and if you really want to know about marketing or music, make sure you lead with that because John has more opinions on both, and he has knowledge. You'll hear some of it in the upcoming episode, plus stories about starting his podcast, starting in the mailroom, and starting the next stage of his life. Before we get there, remember that if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterward, you can find all related ways to contact John and myself in the show notes. You can find John's corner of the internet at thesharp-end.com, and easy links to his podcast, Cafe W.O.W, can be found at thesharp-end.com/podcast. As always, don't forget you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, and of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. John, I describe this show as a cup of coffee, and I can't help but notice that the podcast that you have started is literally set within a cafe where some people choose things harder than a cup of coffee, but people have a nice beverage and they talk. Why just start a podcast?
Great question, because there aren't many of them around. And the reason I did it was because I have a lot of very good friends and acquaintances that I've met along the way. And it's almost like a scrapbook, really. I've taken a very different approach. I'm not into life hacking. I do, my guests will give tips about their trade. And the whole purpose is to unearth the uniqueness of their craft, but also about them. And so it's really a true conversation in a virtual coffee bar, and we go to places that are very different to most podcasts. We get right into the early stages of individuals, and so for me, it's the purpose was to unearth the uniqueness of the people that I enjoy the company of, and as the times go on and I start to find new people, it'll be the same thing. It'll be just taking them on a different path than the normal one.
Now, you were in radio at some point, or still are, and
Yeah.
I know that you've been in marketing for forever, and obviously these are skills that are required for podcasting to certain degrees, depending on, but you could have done anything.
I think, I'm still going to have my business, my branding business, and I enjoy helping people, especially nonprofits. I talk a lot about this unearth uniqueness, and I fundamentally believe that is where the truth lies for an organization. And whether it's a small nonprofit or a large company, we tend to get lost in all of this. And so by having the podcast and having my business, they kind of work in parallel because they're trying to do the same thing to unearth the uniqueness. But to go on to how you create one, well, you know better than anybody how challenging it is. And for me, the conversation has always been a fairly easy one. I love talking to people. The technology is hard to do it well. There's a lot of podcasts out there, but I've had very good assistance from people like you and Ty Hildenbrand to really up the game technically, because it's so important that people get a good quality sound as well as a good quality conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, you were a professional through what I would call the greatest technological switch in the last maybe 300 years, where when you first started professionally, I mean, let's start here. When you started professionally, what were you using to write things down? Like, were typewriters? I mean, I know you're not that old, but we don't have to go that far back.
But it is I started in the mail room, and that's when we had paper mail, and I was sorting out all the magazines for the Shell executives when I started my first job at Shell, and it was literally you would get the envelopes in, you'd open the envelope, send the letters to the executives. They would respond through their typing pool to the response to the letter from the businesses, and then they would wait for the response. And so it was literally how people did business. And I worked in Shell Center in the middle of Waterloo, and they had two buildings, and they had something called a Lamson tube, and that was a suction kind of device which you'd send all of the mail down to the central mail room down this suction tube. It's like those old department stores that used to send the bills up. It was quite different. And so I remember very well. I remember when fax machines came out, and fax machines were shockingly innovative. And also, of course, when email started coming through, and then when the internet came along, and how difficult it was to reblog something when you were writing. And now, of course, you just click something and it's forwarded and away you go. So, yeah, I have gone through the technology, and I think, but there's some still fundamental truths that underlie whether it's advertising or marketing that seem to get lost along the way. We think the technology is everything, but actually the differentiation comes from the humanity, not the technology.
But I mean, you're a human, and you've evolved from a typing pool, which, by the way, I'm not like it's like that's that's the thing. It's not well before my time. You're older than me. You're not that much older but like, I remember mail rooms, and I did an internship at a hospital, and you would go to the mail room, and that's where, I mean, almost every correspondence was, and that's just kind of like the central hub. And then, you've
missed a bit of life if you haven't experienced as a youngster walking into a typing pool, believe me.
I mean, thankfully, I mean, unfortunately, the closest anybody will have is there are movies that kind of put you into these places where there is, a classroom's worth of usually women typing and just endless typing. Yep. And I think that's the closest you're going to come now. But I think even movies is probably the closest you'll get to a mailroom these days as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. Well, I think it depends on the type of company, but in principle, obviously, most of the day-to-day communications is email, and that may even change as well. With AI, there may be very different technologies. But I think what's interesting, the point you make, is about how you evolve.
Yeah.
And do you get, are you a victim of it, or are you a victor of it? And I love talking to people like you and Ty and other younger folk because my mentors have always been probably younger than I because um, sometimes the older you get, people don't want to learn as much, and I have an insatiable desire to learn and to absorb knowledge, and I don't mind making mistakes. I don't mind finding out different ways of doing things and trying to change. And I think that's the nature of why companies and individuals need to be flexible these days. If you're stuck in a way, you're stuck in a particular groove, you're going to have a problem.
So were you always like I mean professional student, I guess, you know, maybe as a hobby you're a student, always if you're always learning, like was this always the case? Because I can tell you
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was, but I think in my early days it got a bit tainted because I didn't do the right subjects at school. And a dear friend of mine, we went on holiday in Wales, and he said to me, "You know what? You really need to go and study what you love." The subject I loved English at school, and I couldn't do it because a range of different the master was too spooky and it was pretty elitist, and so that didn't happen. And so I ended up taking his advice and taking a marketing degree in my spare time while I was working at Shell. And you know, I think companies have lost their way a little bit in how they develop people. Shell was an amazing company for developing its talent, not just those from universities, but they would encourage you to go to evening classes, and they would pay for the books and they'd pay for the courses if you did 90%. And then when I passed them, they recognized it and promoted me. And it was just a wonderful culture of recognition for people who are trying to work a little bit harder, you know.
If you don't mind me asking, this is a slightly personal but professional question, which is how many companies have you worked for before you started your own?
Good question. I've worked in 4. I worked for Shell for 20 years, and then I worked for a telecoms company. Then I worked for a spin-off from the telecoms company. Then I worked for Air Products, and then I did my own thing. So I did 2 20-year stints. One was with Shell and one was Air Products. But the interesting thing about Shell in particular was it was at a time when you really could experiment. It was a unique time. I started out in operations after I moved on. I was in operations. I then went into sales. I then went into advertising. I then went into back into sales again as a manager. I then went into public affairs, and then I went into a step out venture. So it was an extraordinary learning curve. And I the other thing I did was I made my own luck too. I got to know the people and the places I wanted to be, and you know, and became friends with them, and they alerted me when opportunities arose. So, you know, I think you make your own luck a lot of the time in your career. So Shell was a wonderful training ground for me, and same with Air Products. Although I had a similar job, the actual challenges were radically different. You know, as technology changed, as organizations changed, and they were both terrific jobs.
I'll say, for anyone under the age of 40 listening, you are a unicorn. 2 20-year jobs. I mean, I know what the statistics are right now, as far as like, I don't know, I think 7 is the longer end of the spectrum right now for staying in one place. And that's not always, I mean, that's both ways. That's just kind of how it works. But I love the idea that within those 20 years, it's not like you just went up, up, up. You made lateral moves. You tried different things. It's kind of like you had the career I wish I could have. And I only say that because you still
can have.
Well,
you still can have.
The problem is I got to find an organization willing to take a chance, because I sit down with people, and I did this with you. and they ask me what I want to do, and I always say I don't know because I don't like lying to people. And I genuinely, and you know, I know there's people out there that can really sell themselves. However, you know, if they need to fit into this cookie cutter place or this, I've just never been that person. I'm very good at remembering stuff because I usually don't make stuff up, and I don't stretch things. And that's just because I wouldn't be able to remember. If I promised you something I couldn't do in 2 weeks' time, I wouldn't be able to remember that. Right. So I know that honesty is the best way, but I also know sometimes that's a detriment. Not knowing what you want your career path to be, is not easy for a lot of people to understand. Yep. And talking to you understood that. I think part of it is because you yourself were searching as you were going along.
Yeah. And that was a luxury. And there's probably less of a luxury now because things are more compartmentalized, especially working from home. You don't get that teamwork. You don't get that conversation. You don't necessarily meet people that could help you along the way. But I've always I learned a phrase many years ago, and I kind of liked it for myself, really, which is being the leading edge of conformity, which is basically to challenge yourself and the organization, but not in such a way that you become irrelevant. And I think that what I tried to do, and I think I succeeded in a lot of cases, was to just educate and inform without threatening people or situations. And a lot of it is about maybe using humor and companionship to get your perspective over.
And there's a portion of that is a little lost on a Zoom call or just a straight up phone call. You know, yep. I mean, I feel like the oldest man in the room sometimes when I'm just like, call me. Like I will pick up my phone. I will talk on my phone. I may be one of the few people in my entire friend group that talks on the phone. And I don't know what the right word is. It may be begrudgingly. I have made them begrudgingly answer because they will talk to me. But like I'm the only person that calls them that they pick up. Everything else goes to voicemail or could be a text.
And I think that is a little bit of a generational thing. And it's also a timing thing too, because people are busy, but at the same time, there is no doubt, as soon as I start texting and it gets more than 4 sentences, I push the button for a phone call because my belief is that if it's a 2-word answer, that's fine on either side. But if it starts getting complicated, firstly, I'm lousy at typing. And secondly, I want to have a richer conversation because a text is really toilet paper as opposed to having a rich conversation. And I always carry a notebook with me. Sometimes I dictate into notes, but by and large, I'll carry a notebook around me to capture stuff. And again, it's this whole texture thing. I was talking to someone today. I've suddenly got some amazing vinyl that I've bought off Facebook Marketplace, which is a first for me. And just the thrill of putting an old jazz record on and cleaning it off and hearing the texture of that jazz record and reading the sleeve notes. It's kind of like the music equivalent of the typing pool. It's a lost art, but it's a stunning way of listening to music.
However, unlike the typing pool, it is coming back, or it may not be coming back necessarily, but it's not completely gone forever. I would
agree with you.
Oh man, I got so lucky with past me, right? Because I remember space being a premium, specifically when I moved back home after college. And so the first thing I did was I bought binders for DVDs and CDs because, well, all this plastic takes up room and I don't need it. However, I kept all the inserts. I kept all the booklets. And I don't know what frame of mind I was in to do that other than now many years later, decades later, I'm so thankful to have those notebooks. And while I have a small vinyl collection, because I grew up in the CD era, having the little booklet, being able to read the equivalent of liner notes. I don't know what those booklets, some of those booklets were just 2 pages of credits, and some of them were, here's every lyric and here's a bunch of thank yous and photos. But I still have them. And I'm so thankful I didn't get rid of them when I got rid of the cases. But like you, again, I got
texture. It's about texture. It's about the richness of a conversation, the richness of enjoying music, the richness of having a pen. If someone, does something nice, I will get out my fountain pen and write them a thank you. Now it's old school, and the kids won't do that and all the rest of it, but they do thank you, but they do it in a different way. But I just, there's certain things, and I'm not hanging on to it because I'm an old fart or anything. I'm hanging on to it because perhaps there's a newness about having heritage values and heritage feelings about the things that are fundamental. Like a good walk. I mean, most people I see walking have got their headphones on and they're racing along because they want their Apple Watch to be better than last. I'm sitting there smelling the flowers. I'm walking quietly. I'm looking at the colors. I'm looking at and they may say, well, yeah, you can afford to, but we can all afford to.
We can. I usually am listening to something when I take a walk, but to what you said earlier, though, in the last 2 years, I got married and had a child, and I will say we hand wrote thank you notes to everybody. We didn't have to. I'm sure, and I'm not throwing shade, and I'm not trying to say we're better than anybody else, but I'm sure in some of those cases, a thank you text or even a phone call would have been enough. We didn't have to handwrite it out. We didn't have to is the point, but we chose to.
But you don't have to do an awful lot of stuff, and that's the problem. If everyone is busy life hacking and shortcutting their ways through, what are you racing for? Who is the guy that jumps the lights on the 309 on Center Valley Parkway that has a fair chance of getting wiped out forever? Where's he going? Is he going to meet the president or the queen or whatever? It's like, where are they going that is more important than saving their life?
Well, there's an element of that where I get. So you are your own boss. You've had a long career. Would it be safe to say this is your retirement gig?
I don't define retirement. I regard it as next stage.
Okay.
I have talked a lot to people. I said, you think of a potter who crafts beautiful vases and he does it every day. Does he look at 65 and go, "Oh, 65, time to quit"? Not me. I think if there's certain skills that you have that you can bring, then I don't think, unless you don't like what you were doing before, I don't think you actually give up whether you want to write. It takes a different direction.
Okay.
And so I'm doing a lot of more writing and, the podcasts and whatever. But I would say that it's just the next stage, and I'm staying connected with what's happening in the world. I do spend a lot of time on the right kind of stuff on LinkedIn. There's some very good people to follow that offer very contemporary advice, and those that offer rich advice. For anybody who's interested in advertising, don't think about following social media gurus that give you AI tips. Follow someone like Dave Trott, who has timely pieces of advice about advertising, which are just timeless truths that anybody in communications or marketing should follow.
So I bring it up because people will look at you and go, you have plenty of time to do X, Y, and Z. And here I am trying to convince my friends I don't know what to describe them, I guess, in the pits, in the trenches of corporate either monotony or, the latter, so to speak. And I listen to one album a day. Now, granted, sometimes those double albums really take up a lot of time, and it's hard to, I'm probably, over the last 2 years, I'm probably more like 6.5 albums per week than I am 7 for 7. Some days just get too busy and it's 10 o'clock and, it's a 2-hour album or whatever. But I try as best I can. So it started with, trying to learn more about certain bands, certain genres, whatever. But now that's kind of it's basically my meditation in a sense. Cause I try to listen to the album. I try to, I always, the picture I would put of myself, as cliche as it is, the end of Dazed and Confused. I've got headphones on and I'm laying down. Sometimes I go for a walk, but it's headphones on, and I'm actively listening to this album. And a lot of them, even if they're bands I love, a lot of the music is new to me, which is great. And so I try and get my friends, I'm like, yeah, but you should listen to this album. It's like 53 minutes. You have an hour. Like, even if they aren't going to treat it as meditation, you can do it while you're commuting. You can listen to it while you're washing the dishes or cooking. It's fine. Like, you can do this. And I think that for a lot of them, and I think this is true of not just them being busy. I think this is true of a lot of people as like a very big generalization. The starting part is the hardest part. Because if they did put on an album for an hour, they'd realize it's not that much of a cost. I mean, even, regardless of what service you have, almost everybody's got a service or access to it. Even Spotify, for the most part, has a free tier. You may have an ad. It may take you an hour to listen to a 53-minute album, but you can sit down and listen without shuffle straight through an album. Like, that's possible. Yep. That's doable. That's not something, I'm not asking them to run a marathon. And I always bring it up, but I always get a little bit disheartened when people are like, oh, I just don't have the time. Because to your point about the person gunning through a red light, you're really going to look back on the week and go like, I'm so glad I worked that extra 50 hours or whatever. Like, or I'm so glad I burnt myself out, which is, from where I'm staying, I'm just trying to be a good friend, to being like, all right, here's the thing you can do to prevent burnt out. Here's an hour. I'm not, you've got 24 of them and I'm not even asking for a full one. And
I think that, it's a bit of a fallacy too, to say that I've got time on my hands and these hardworking guys. I don't think anyone's got time on their hands, because time is a finite resource. And the older you get, the more you realize there's a lot you need to cram into it. Now, it's a different kind of work or a different kind of use of time, but money isn't the only resource that's important. I know it's important if you haven't got it.
Yeah.
And I know it's important if you're trying to raise a family and you're trying to make ends meet. Of course it's important. But your health is really important too, at whatever age. And, and so is your time. And so I think if you using time to listen to music or whatever as a time for discovery of ideas, because at the end of the day, the only thing that we bring to work are ideas. Because if we don't, then AI is just going to take over from us. But if we bring ideas and we bring vitality to the role and we bring a different perspective to it, which can help make the organization that we are involved with unique, then we bring value. If we don't, and we're just clocking in and clocking out, then we don't bring value to ourselves, and we certainly don't bring value to the organization. So it's up to us to look at things, whether you're at work. And one of the things I did, I was quite careful with my time when I went to meetings, especially when I was traveling. I would never be one, and there were plenty that would just turn up for a dinner, for the meeting, and then we'd have the meeting and then would leave wherever we were, Atlanta, LA, or wherever it was. I would go early. I'd take the first flight out. I had my phone. I had email. I could do exactly. I was as connected as anybody was. If anybody needed me for a meeting, I could phone in. But what I did was to discover the areas I was in. So when I was actually in the meetings for a day or a couple of days or whatever it was in the area, I felt that I'd given the people who had invited me to the meeting, whether it be a customer or another part of the company, the service of finding out about their culture and their city and finding out for myself. And you can do that. I defy anybody to say, I'm so busy, I've got meetings all day, I'm going to fly in, I'm going to do the meeting and fly back again. You're kidding yourselves. And by the way, if you don't believe it now, you sure will when you retire. You go, why did I do that?
So,
and the answer is because you did.
Hilariously, I can think of one example where it's impossible to do, and I don't remember who it was, and I feel very bad that I can't figure. I'm trying to figure this out. I don't know, but the people that I'm about to describe, many would consider very lucky. They're rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
But when you hear, and especially these older rock, it might have been Duff from Guns N' Roses who said early on in our career, especially on say the Use Your Illusion tour, where they toured the world for 3 straight years. And I know health-wise, they weren't, they were drinking, but they were on a machine and didn't have, there's always the cliche of what town are we in? And a good portion of that is because they never, hotel, venue, play, bus, plane, hotel. Okay. If you're in that kind of a place, in that kind of a career, maybe you have an excuse for not seeing the sights, right? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
But most people
maybe
aren't.
You're Mick Jagger, who suddenly works out that I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to go and sit in a bar in New Orleans and have a beer by myself and see if anyone recognizes me, as he's been doing for a lot of things. And a lot of country stars do exactly the opposite. They will actually turn up early and mingle with the fans and before their concerts. And so I know nothing about that business. I know people work incredibly hard and they have ridiculous tour deadlines, and it is one city, and some of the time they don't even know where they are. But I also, when I hear stars and that play locally in Bethlehem at Arts Quest, I hear a lot of them say that we traveled, that when they play the big stage at Music Fest, they say they traveled around the area and wanted to know a bit of the history, So I think it just depends.
Well, I think it's changed too. I mean, one of the reasons that Duff brought it up when I was watching some video was that they don't do that anymore. It's they've been around the world. In fact, there are some bands from that era that probably, maybe 70s on, that arena rock era where, it was all about the concert. How many can we get 104 concerts in 52 weeks in, a bunch of cities. And so they were run ragged, and that was the industry at the time. And now it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more about these things. And I think, as maybe other industries are struggling to catch up with, in a first, the music industry understands that a fresh artist, meaning a rested artist, will put on a better show than one who's tired from 3 consecutive nights traveling from state to state to state, as an example.
Yeah, and I think that also technology has radically changed. I've got a dear friend in the record business, and a lot of people find their talent. I used to go with him to bars and clubs in London to check out bands. He was an A&R guy for one of the record companies, and he was checking out the bands. Now they just go on YouTube and find out, who's gathering a lot of interest and subscribes, and they take it from there. And so the whole essence of how music is discovered and how music is actually transmitted is so radically different. But I think in terms of work, I just feel that you have to pace yourself. If you look at the people at work, there'll be people at work night and day, especially if you're at a hedge fund or whatever it is, and you'll make good money and you'll burn out, and then you'll go and work for a different kind of company. It's a tried and tested formula, but the simple truth is, the one that sits quietly and thinks while everyone else is talking, and then offers their advice, is the one that people admire. And I wouldn't say I'm necessarily that one, but there are people who have that ability to just absorb information, stay away from the noise. And one of the reasons they do that is they give themselves space. They're ruthless with their time, absolutely ruthless. And whether it is about choosing the right people, or to have dinner with, or choosing, the right meetings to go to, they give themselves space, and that is where their stardom comes from.
I would also say the space is also processing time, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't, you can sit there and listen most of the time, if you take in that much information, you have to process it. And that requires space, which usually requires, if you're a writing person, you can write it down later. Or if you're a vocal person, you can, use someone else as a sounding board, or talk to yourself and record it, or just think it over and turn it over in your mind. All of these things take time. It's not instant, and you need to take time just for whatever it is. My processes, for the podcast, for the blog, and it's bled into almost everything else. The quality that I get by putting some of these things, rough drafts or, edited conversations, on a shelf to give myself space to come look at it in a new light, or to edit it without remembering what I took out, or what I, the initial idea, and coming fresh. Space can mean a lot of different things, but it's very important.
It is. And I think in terms of writing, this is where I sometimes struggle, because I need space and I need quiet to let ideas come out. I have a lot of writer friends, and they're just naturals. They'll just write. Now, some of them do it in a coffee bar. A lot of them go. A friend of mine goes, John Simmons, who's a wonderful writer and worth following on Substack. He goes to museums and will just sit and write. He has a ritual which he's had for decades, which is Friday night is writing night. And he will go up to his writing attic and he will write. And that's all he does. And that's why he's there. And so he writes, which is a wonderful discipline.
Yeah.
Because you know why you're there. And, I've read countless books on this about you can do what you like. You can twiddle your thumbs. You can whatever. What you can't do is get up, and you can't. And you just got to. And then you start putting pen to paper, and the concept of free or automatic writing, where you just start writing stuff that comes out of your head, and just get it out there, is the opportunity to release that torrent, which then eventually becomes the kind of flow that you're looking for in the writing that you're doing.
So when you sit down to write, pen and paper or keyboard, like what's your go-to? Like,
normally a pen and paper to start with.
Okay.
And then, well, it depends. Yeah, normally it is. I have a writing platform called Lex, which if it's easier for me to just bullet point stuff, I'll use that. But normally it'll be pen and paper, and then I'll just transcribe it. And then once I've got the rudiments of an idea, then I'll try and put it together. Sometimes it just flows out. And, it's quite different between doing a poem or a eulogy. They have different processes, and one is deeper than the other, although, it depends on the poem. But there is, I try to create a structure and an environment to write. Sometimes it's real difficult at home because there's so many things going on. You kind of feel guilty. And it goes back to this whole issue of you've got plenty of time and others haven't. You don't. You never do. There's always something. And anybody that's working 24/7 at the moment, when they eventually moved on to the next stage, they'll go, how the hell did I ever work? How
Yeah.
did I ever get, and so I think that you'll either be always busy or you will be always not busy. And it's about you really rather than about the work or the environment.
Yeah, because I can turn around and look back to the last full-time professional gig I had, which was more or less eight hours a day. And then I'd come home and I had a blog that was weekly, so it's not that much, but 3 or 4 nights a week, I'd podcast till 1 or 2 a.m., get up and do it all over again.
Yep.
And I look back at that for as busy as I am now with a child to raise. I look back at that and I go, how did I even do, how is that possible? I don't know, arguably, if I'm busier now or then, but I do look back and I go, I don't know how I pulled any of that off.
But you do, and that's the other thing. When you have a crisis in your life, or if you have a deadline, you just prioritize.
You find a way. Yeah.
You find a way. You always do. And I think, quite honestly, I think women have they do it better than men do. I think they just juggle things better. I think men faff around too much. And I think that we kind of overanalyze things, and I just think that I got to be careful what I say here, but I do feel that when I've seen, well, I take my wife for example, she just gets stuff done, and women have a wonderful ability to get stuff done.
It feels like their triage part of the brain,
but they're smart as well. They get to the conclusion quicker.
Yeah,
they do. And so anyway, that's a aside. But I think that I think this whole time thing is very important. My brother is an expert at timing. He's really good. He focuses on the things that matter, and he's not distracted by all the shiny objects or whatever. He will come back to you in his time, and he's just ruthlessly organized, and that gives him space.
I think the hard part for me is I don't get distracted by the shiny things, but I am juggling more than one thing in my head. And for me, the hardest part has always been focusing on the task at hand, despite the other 3 things I'm not currently doing. Now, some of them, as I stated, need space. I shouldn't be thinking about them at all, but they're still there. And I think that's my hardest part. It's just like because I can juggle more than one thing, and I can focus, but occasionally, I sit down to read a book, and then all of a sudden I have to reread 2 paragraphs because my brain went on a sabbatical thinking about like a post I have to write.
And that's okay. That's okay. That's what jazz is for. You go and sit down and listen to jazz, and it'll go off on a tangent, and so do you. And that's the essence. And you're allowed to do that. And as long as you're doing that and you bring yourself back, you've gone in a different direction, and you've come back to where you were, which is fine. Everything isn't homework. When I listen to a lot of jazz at the upstairs at the Symphony Hall in Allentown, which is just the most beautiful jazz there. A lot of the times I go there and I just discover things about myself or an idea or whatever, because the musicians have gone in a direction and I've followed them, and I've taken a turning off where they are and thought of an idea or an opportunity. And that's the essence of music. That's the essence of reading. And that's the joy, because you've immersed yourself.
Okay. And I want to ask, were you always a jazz guy, like from the beginning, or was it a progression, or a transition, so to speak?
Yeah, I love all types of music. I really do. And although I have a jazz show on our local radio station, WDIY, which I love, there are people on that radio station who know a lot more about jazz than I do. But maybe they haven't been to as many concerts as I have. Because I grew up going to jazz clubs in London. I actually saw Buddy Rich at Ronnie Scott's, which was an absolute, that was in the mid 70s, I think it was. And I used to hang out at the 606 Club in my teens as well. And for me, again, it was about the occasion.
Okay.
There are the people who know jazz. Very good friend of mine, he'll always ask, well, do you know he played with him and he played with him? I don't really care. What I know is I love the music and I love being a part of the music and I love what it brings to me. But then I feel that way about Santana. And I remember when I left school, a guy said to me, probably some of the wisest advice I got at school was, here are 3 albums that you need to buy. One of them was Santana One. One of them was Chicago Transit Authority,
Okay.
and one of them was the Allman Brothers live at Fillmore East. And what has been amazing since I came to America was that I've actually seen all of those bands and actually met the Allman Brothers, and met a member of Chicago as well. And so it's like a dream come true because that kind of music has been a huge part of me as much as some of the jazz has. And of course, the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the Kinks, all of that. I kind of grew up with that.
So if I were to put you on the spot, would you pass along the same 3 albums? Like if you ran into younger you, would you
Yep.
pass along the same 3 albums, or do you have 3 different albums to pass along?
Somebody asked me to go on WDIY and give my top 3 albums. And not only did I refuse, but I had nightmares for days afterwards because the concept of whittling it down to 3, I would feel very guilty about leaving someone out.
Okay, so let's ignore the content. Let's
Right.
talk about the quantity for a moment.
Right.
What's the lowest number? We're not going to discuss what goes in it,
No, right.
but what's the lowest number you would be
That's a great
comfortable
question.
giving? Like, are we talking like it's got to be at least 20? Like
Yeah,
John
at
can't
least,
do anything
yeah.
less than 20? Is it 25?
I think 20 would probably be about it. I mean, even 10 is pushing it because of I love so many subgenres. I mean, I love some of the early 1970s Caravan, Soft Machine kind of rock, Moody Blues kind of stuff. I love Atomic Rooster. I love the psychedelic Electric Prunes. Two of those tracks, like Get Me to the World on Time and I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, was some of my favorite tracks. So I the Lemon Pipers, Green Tambourine, the kind of the bop style of it. Even the Monkees, some of the stuff there, right the way through to Zeppelin, Whole Lot of Love, which I told my kids in the car when it came on, you have to be quiet for 7 minutes because you're in school. This is the lesson, the music lesson. And they listen to the Whole Lot of Love. And to me, that's a seminal music track. It's just everything.
So
First time I actually heard a proper stereo as well was listening to that. I was in a chemistry lab at school, and the teacher let the guys bring in. They had this special speaker. It might have been physics, maybe, I don't know, but they played a Whole Lot of Love on these enormous speakers. Blew my head away. Couldn't believe it.
So we've narrowed your number down to 20. How long do you think it would take you to come up with the 20?
5 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I have done a Spotify top 100, I think, somewhere.
Okay.
But it would be very genre specific. I would pick something out of something that represents something. I'd take a jazz track. I mean, jazz. I mean, I love Blue Note, but I also love fusion. I also love some of the stuff that Bob James does. So, I mean, I could do 20 jazz albums. So it is about being ruthless. And it's like cleaning out your clothes closet. Oh, I can't get rid of that because I've had that for years. That T-shirt I wore for this,
All right. Well, I didn't want, I'm not putting you on the spot. I just wanted to know because I feel like, I could easily do 20. I don't know that 10 would be that hard. 5 might be rough for me. I think to narrow it down to 5 would be rough. But I kind of agree with you. That might take a year. Like it might take a solid you have your off the top of your head list, and then you go through life and you go, oh, and that one, and that one, and that one. And then you finally just go, all right, so what do I have? And then you sit down and you go like, oh, this is a list of 100 and I got to narrow it down. But
well, I think the other thing is that the older you get, especially when you've had kids, their music bleeds into whether they are favorite tracks or not is a different issue, but they are influences, the punk, the new wave, the two-tone with the English beat and these kind of bands. Again, fantastic genres, Mirror in the Bathroom by the English beat. I mean, how could I leave that out? And so, and then the kids, my son was always into alternative stuff, and I ended up going to see a concert with him to see The Offspring at the age of 16. I actually went down crowd surfing with him, and he was the one that wanted to get out first, actually. But so again, energy music. And again, my daughter with the music she listens to. If I was to choose a genre, apart from jazz, that I would say absolutely I can listen to and do listen to all the time, it would be funk and soul. The funk music, I would, I want to manifest myself going back and having a gig with the Nightlighters, the guys that play a lot of gigs in the Valley, using only vinyl, and they play funk and soul music. I want to be up there with them.
I think that's when I do my next journey, I need to include more funk and soul, because I like it, but it's always like, oh wait, I don't listen to enough of this. But again,
I totally immerse myself in the weekends with funk and soul. There's a station called My Soul in London. It's on the web and an app, and I just have a ritual listening to that from most of the day on Saturday and Sunday, because the music they play is just the music of my time. And when my wife and I first started going out, we went to 3 or 4 soul and jazz concerts a week. So there's, Jeffrey Osborne was our first date. So it's embedded in you.
All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. Okay, John isn't Strider, but the riddle of Strider from the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, the first stanza of which I just recited, does spring forth because of our conversation. You can get lost in a book, in an album, and from that journey you can emerge with something new or something reimagined. John's Sharp End is based upon unearthing uniqueness, but that doesn't always come from the surface. We have to dig deeper into art, into imagination, into ourselves. These conversations and those that John has on his cafe W.O.W. often help us to reveal to others, as much as ourselves, new things. It doesn't have to be a wholly unique way of seeing something. Perhaps in retelling a story that you've told 1,000 times, you change the order of 2 words or describe something with a synonym and the whole meaning changes, or at least your perspective does. That's kind of the whole thing about giving yourself space, giving yourself time. You can get lost, and sometimes you are lost, but you can always be found. Anyway, I'll finish the riddle of Strider for you now. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadow shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 169. And now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can find all related ways to contact John and myself in the show notes. You can find John's Corner of the Internet at the sharp-end.com, and easy links to the Cafe W.O.W podcast can be found at the sharp-end.com/podcast. The music for this episode was provided by Henno Heitur. Email and comments can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, John, do you have one final question for me?
I do. I have a piece of paper with a wild card, and is any job that you could possibly like to have, what shall I fill in for your application to be successful and do?
Okay. So I like this question already because I don't have to be good at it. I can become good at this thing. I know at one point, it would have been, like a studio engineer / owner, where I would have a studio full on for music and or podcasting, and I just get to rent out time, but I'd also be able to sit there and produce and be a part of the process. I don't know, that kind of ebbs and flows based on the projects I'm working on, how tough or hard they are, and I know that's probably standard for everything else. And I really do like consulting, in that, probably in a similar vein to you, where I just like helping people. It's just, it's fun to hear other ideas and go, well, I've talked to a few people, like this might be able to help you. And I don't know if it's a shock to anyone, but like when my consulting is always suggestive, I never really give actual direction. Right. So that's another, I guess, option. And then there's always, would it be cool to just be Agent Palmer, keep the podcast, keep the blog going, and just whatever else comes of it, comes of it? I don't know that I could pick between the three, although obviously if I owned my own studio, I wouldn't stop doing the podcast. The time for the blog may ebb and flow, but I don't know. I think may all right, so maybe it has to be straight up just being Agent Palmer, because it feels like the most natural thing for me. The hard part is, and the hardest part of it has always been selling it, because I'm the first person to tell you I don't take any of the good advice that I give most of the time for the blog or the podcast. And that's, I'll be the first thing you need to be a successful blogger or podcaster, especially if you're not already famous, is a theme. Right. Or a niche. You need something cohesive. And I've always fought against that for one very important reason. I wouldn't still be doing this if I had chosen a singular theme. I wouldn't still be writing if I chose a singular. If I just reviewed movies, the blog would have died many, 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 many years ago. If I just as has been talked about on this show at some points, if I had just interviewed authors, because it was the one thing, I had a relationship with authors through the blog, and they'd find out I was involved in podcasting, but I wasn't on any podcasts that were, with readers. And so it was like, well, you could just start a podcast and only talk to authors. I do love talking to authors. I don't think this show survives 50 episodes if I'm only talking to authors. And so I think that if your wild card gives me the ability to continue to follow whatever my interest happens to be, I know you. Like we sat on boards together. I think I met you. So I know you, and I'm allowed to have you on my show. But I've also met random strangers on the internet who seemed interesting, and I've had them on my show. And it's not, I'm the, this is why you need the celebrity if you're going to do this and be quote unquote successful in monetarily. But I guess.
I think what's interesting, if you look at someone like Stephen Bartlett, who is extraordinarily successful, especially in the UK, he has a very broad range of guests. Tim Ferriss, a very broad range of guests. They're not like marketing this or other. They cover everything from medicine to fitness to mental health to marketing to starting your own business. And they approach it in a slightly different way. And it's like you and I'm not going to just do a marketing or a branding podcast, which I could easily do and call all the branding people up and decide whether brand equity is more important or differentiation versus distinctiveness. And it's like, hello. So I think what I do include marketers and branding people in the podcast, but I also include people like Jason King Jones, who's the Shakespeare Festival director, and and they've got so much to say.
Yeah.
And one of the other cool things that has evolved from an interview or conversation I had with John Simmons was he challenged me to write a poem earlier on, and so I challenged him to write one for the podcast, which he did. And now everybody that's on the podcast has to create a poem, which we then go through, or a piece of prose, or just some basic writing. And it's through that discovery period that we really have a fascinating conversation. And it isn't a Q&A. It's much more of a two-way thing.
And I also think you could probably write me down on that wild card now, because we didn't define success. And I don't have to think, I know this is successful, because I'm not doing it for money. This is the, and the same with the blog and reading all the books in my house, which more on that at some point. I don't know when that'll be a thing, but I'm curious. I want to know more. And if this is the way, through a conversation, through reading a book, through listening to an album I've not heard of, or trying to, I write about every book I read because it helps me process that book. That's just the way it is. If the blog went away, I'd probably still do it in some capacity because it helps.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you could write this down. I mean, monetarily, it could make some money. That would be great. But I don't know. I'm always a little hesitant, right, when it comes to money, because does that change? I would need,
So what would happen if someone offered you 50 grand to sponsor your podcast? What would you change? So you don't need to change anything, but I like what you're doing. Here's 50 grand.
So this is where
what would you do? What would you do differently?
So there's two things, right? One, I wouldn't do anything differently. I hope, right? But two, I do understand that money would change it a little bit. And I have all the best intentions in the world. And if it's 50 grand for, a sponsorship that's a true sponsorship, that we don't change anything, I would like to think that I could accept the money and not change anything, but I'm human, and there's a chance it would change it in some capacity. I know not how, but I would very much like to keep it as it is.
Pure.
I mean, I do think, the other piece of advice I always give people, do seasons. Don't do an open-ended show. This is, let's see, this is episode, if I hope, I don't mind putting myself on the spot. This should be episode 169. It's been every 2 weeks for double 169, right? So, I'm thankful I didn't go weekly. Weekly, I would have burnt out long ago. Yep. I guess technically I'm on season 1. Jokes have been thrown at my expense with friends saying like, oh, when he gets to 1,000, he'll start season 2 and stuff like that. And it's, we'll see.
But I think what you do have is a really good process. You have a very good visual appeal for the site. You have very clear identity for it. It looks good technically. It sounds good technically. And you've got longevity. And I think that, that's it. What I do know, and I haven't been particularly good at it recently, I need to do more, is you've just got to promote it. You've got to take clips out of it. You've got to put it on YouTube. You've got to put it on social. You've just got to make people aware that something is happening here and it's worth digging into, because that's the essence of advertising. It is about communicating the value that you bring. Otherwise, you really are doing it for yourself.
Well, and I'm very aware, not just from you, and not just from, every other blogger I've ever met, but every podcaster every creative. It's like, well, we could all get jackets made saying, we all know we could promote more.
Yeah.
And that's just, there is also an element of, there's a certain creative aspect where we need separate marketers, because I can easily sell your podcast to other people, but when it comes to my own, I've got my process, and the moment this is done, I'm on to the next.
Right.
And so it's this, and I'm not saying
the cobbler's kids have got no shoes.
Yeah. And it's very much also like and I know YouTube is a very different thing, but I follow a lot of creators on YouTube that are also fairly open with the grind got too much. So I pulled back, and I started the podcast after the blog. The blog was weekly. The blog has maintained weekly. I didn't want to give up the blog in order to do the podcast, which is how the podcast ended up being every other week instead of weekly. And I think, back to our conversation about being lucky to keep the inserts from those CDs.
Yep.
I didn't know what I was really doing by saying this will be every other week, but I got really lucky that Past Me did.
Right. But you're a good writer. What would the concept of ghostwriting be for you?
I don't know. I have, I can tell you that there were a couple short part-time gigs where I did some, somewhat ghostwriting, where I would write a speech for someone and then they would make it their own. I never did it long enough to understand their language, so they always had to do some tweaks. I'm not against it, but I've never, the opportunity doesn't arise very often. It's very funny to me. As we record right now in late 2025, West Wing has come back on Netflix, and I own the series on physical disc, but I tend to be a little bit lazy when it comes to physical disc stuff, and so if something's on a streaming service I have access to, I'm more likely to watch it than if it's a physical disc in my house. And I only bring it up because I never wanted to be the president, and I never wanted to be the press secretary. So of the main characters that we're talking about now, you're talking about a deputy chief of staff, because I didn't want to be chief of staff. So a deputy chief of staff, or chief of staff, or a communications director, or a deputy communications director. And as things have gone along, right, when I first watched the show, when I was a much younger man, I wanted to be the deputy communications director. As I've gotten older, I think I just want to be the communications director. And it's a weird shift, because it's not always just about, like, obviously they're very distinct characters. So it's not like, but when it comes to just looking at what the jobs do, I'm still amazed I have a podcast. I didn't want to be, this is, using that analogy.
Why are you amazed?
Because using that
the one thing that you have done, and Ty has done this, Ty Hildenbrand of the Solid Verbal, and I've done it with my jazz show. I'm up to 145 jazz shows now with WDIY, and I'm nowhere near as much as my colleagues who've probably got double and treble that amount. But it's A, because you love it, and B, because you stick at it. And I think that's an important. So in there is maybe somewhere about exactly why you should be Agent Palmer, because you stick at it, because you love it, and because it gives you pleasure.
Yeah, that's probably, I just say I'm amazed because this is the press secretary thing. This is the out front, you can hear my voice, as opposed to being the communications director and having the press secretary go out there and say it, or being the speechwriter and having the president go out and say it. And so that's the amazing part. Now that I'm here, after, being behind the scenes before, I can't think of giving it up. But I still think back, I could still argue with myself in my own brain about, like, maybe I should just keep helping other people tell their stories.
But you can do that. You can do that anyway. And that's the point. I know it.
Okay.
It is about time balance. I'm helping organizations find their uniqueness, and then I do the podcast as well. And so I don't think it's an either or, it's an and. And then you just set yourself realistic deadlines about what you can achieve. But if you have a gift for helping people, especially nonprofits who need it more than ever, then you should follow that. But I do think at the end of the day, and I say this to the kids, they found their way, and they're finding out what they want to do. But you've got to follow your passion. And the other thing I say to people in organizations, and it doesn't matter if you're 30, it doesn't matter if you're 40, doesn't matter if you're 50, doesn't matter if you're 60. Have a plan. Because someone's going to knock on your door and say, hey, look, we're going in a different direction here. I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go. Or we're folding the company, or we're moving to India, or we're moving to, Alaska or something. And so a circumstance radically changes. And I've always said to people, I never understand why people get surprised when they hear news, because you really need to be your own issues manager. You need to be aware of the circumstances around you, understand what your company or organization, your nonprofit is doing, and understanding your options. And it's really important to write them down, and with your partner, if you've got one, to have a plan for the next stage. And therefore, you don't get upset, you don't get disappointed, you absorb your learning, and you move on.